So we will have two welcomes.
Recording in
This
progress.
meeting is being recorded.
Hello, good morning. My name is Matthias Monroy. We are now starting the event on the Pegasus inquiry. I am replacing Canel Lavitte from the ECCHR. She's stuck in the airport in Amsterdam, so she will not make it in time to do the moderation. As I'm part of the organizing team, so we agreed upon that I will try to replace her. And yeah, so you are here at an event of Cornelia Ernst and Saskia Brigmont, and we have wonderful panelists that I will introduce later. And yeah, Connie, would you like to?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for your coming. We are really happy to meet you, to discuss this very important topic, European topic, German topic, Spanish topic, Polish topic, and a lot of other countries are involved. We know that very well. I have prepared some remarks in German, but I think I can speak in German in Berlin, and I would like to do that. Ja, wenn wir auf den Untersuchungsausschuss schauen, der gegründet wurde, der sogenannte Pegasus-Untersuchungsausschuss im Europäischen Parlament, dem auch ich zugehörig bin, dann ist es kein Wunder, dass Sophie in 't Veld, die Rapporteurin des zu erwartenden Ausschusses, von einem Europe Watergate gesprochen hat und einen Bericht vorgelegt hat mit vielen Unsicherheiten auch. Einfach deshalb, weil nicht alle mit uns geredet haben bisher, nämlich zum Beispiel nicht die Mitgliedstaaten und ihre Regierungen, die uns durchgängig geblockt haben. Aber dieser Bericht, der jetzt im Entwurf vorliegt, der wird sehr, sehr viel dadurch gespeist, dass wir mit Opfern gesprochen haben der Überwachung. Wir haben gesprochen mit einer Menge NGOs, Organisationen, die uns hier behilflich waren. Und insofern ist, glaube ich, ein Report entstanden, der bedeutend ist und ein bisschen heranragt, möglicherweise sogar noch stärker ist als der damalige NSA-Report. Möglicherweise können Sie sich entsinnen, es gab ja schon mal einen Skandal, der auf europäischer Ebene, aber auch hier in der Bundesrepublik, im Bundestag untersucht wurde. Das war die NSA-Affäre. Damals wurde die Kanzlerin selber ausgespäht, aber unter Freunden ist das offensichtlich nicht so schlimm. Ja, im Sommer 21, wie Sie wissen, hatte das Pegasus-Projekt einen Zusammenschluss von Enthüllungsjournalisten, NGOs und Forschern, haben herausbekommen, dass ca. 50.000 Personen hier überwacht wurden, mit verschiedenen Spionageprogrammen ausgespäht wurden. Damit war dann so der Anfang gemacht. Und beim Befassen mit der Problematik haben wir festgestellt, dass das Ausmaß ungeheuerlich ist, dass ja faktisch alles gläsern gemacht werden kann. Und insbesondere haben wir festgestellt, dass natürlich Journalisten, Anwälte, Staatsanwälte, Aktivisten, Politiker, Staatsoberhäupter, ja sogar die Kommission selber überwacht wurde, nämlich der Kommissar Reinders, der dann in einer Nachfrage in einem der ersten Meetings, die wir hatten als Pegasus-Ausschuss, gesagt hat, ja, also so schlimm ist das ja nicht, mir ist ja nichts passiert. Ja, gut, so kann man das natürlich auch sagen. Was uns wichtig ist, ist zu sagen, dass diese Spionageaktion tatsächlich ein Maß erreicht hat, das man vergleichen kann mit der Willkür, Autokratie und fehlenden Rechtsstaatlichkeit von einer ganzen Menge von Staaten, denen wir das lustvoll jeden Tag vorwerfen. Im Übrigen zu Recht. Aber man muss sagen, dass hier in der Europäischen Union in zahlreichen Ländern Ähnliches stattfindet. Das ist nicht nur bedauerlich, sondern das ist auch so etwas wie eine Politik der Doppelstandards, die wir uns gar nicht leisten können, weder in europäischen Ländern noch überhaupt. Halte ich für eine ganz schwierige Sache. Und ich würde schon sagen, wenn wir auf Pegasus schauen, das ist ein moralisches Desaster. Ich will vielleicht hinzufügen, ich bin auch die Präsidentin der EU-Iran-Delegation und da muss ich Ihnen nicht sagen, dass wir da auch 1 bis 2 Probleme momentan haben. Und wenn wir diesen Ländern vorwerfen, alles Mögliche und zu Recht, dann glaube ich, müssen wir auch ein Stück weit mehr tun hier in Europa und Fragen von Menschenrechten und Demokratie ernst nehmen. So, was ist nun unser Punkt, worauf wir orientieren als Linke im Europäischen Parlament? Wir fordern eine Pflicht zur sofortigen Behebung bekannt gewordener Sicherheitslücken, das ist ja nun klar. Wir sind auch der Meinung, dass solche Werkzeuge wie Pegasus, Spyware verboten werden müssen. Ja, und die Rapporteurin schlägt vor, ein Moratorium vorzuschalten. Das halten wir auch für richtig. Das kann man machen. Ein Moratorium für den Verkauf, die Weitergabe und die Nutzung von Überwachungstechnologie. Aber es muss gesorgt werden, dass solche Spywares nicht in Einsatz kommen. Da gibt es keine Einigkeit im Parlament, das ist mir bewusst. Aber dennoch eine wichtige Forderung, eine sehr wichtige Forderung, auf der wir auch bestehen werden. Wir fordern auch den Schutz der betroffenen Opfer. Wir wissen ja, wie viele Dinge hier passiert sind und auch eine Entschädigung dafür und auch die Möglichkeit, Rechtsmittel einzusetzen. Wir haben gesehen im Fall von Spanien, wo wir eine Mission unternommen hatten als linke Fraktion, dass es eigentlich kaum möglich ist, sich wirklich rechtlich zu wehren. Das kann so nicht sein. Das hat etwas mit Rechtsstaatlichkeit zu tun. Alles in allem, ich glaube, dass wir über eines der wichtigsten demokratiepolitischen Probleme unserer Zeit sprechen und über den größten Skandal, Überwachungsskandal des 21. Jahrhunderts. Und deswegen bin ich stolz, dass wir so gute Panelisten hier haben und ich jetzt Saskia Bregmann das Wort übergeben kann, online.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I would like to join Cornelia in welcoming you to this very important event, and thanks for all the organization. I'm really sorry not being with you today, but I still have to travel to Copenhagen today. So I'm happy to intervene remotely, and maybe to add to what Cornelia already mentioned, I would like to first start by praising and thanking the huge work of investigative journalists, from Forbidden Stories to Citizen Lab to Amnesty International, also that have been leading tremendous work. And we wouldn't be here today speaking about this huge scandal, as Cornelia mentioned, without their work. I think it's really important to mention because this kind of very intrusive surveillance has a huge impact on freedom of press. We can see it in our member states, we can see it outside our member states. And this is absolutely, of course, inadmissible. And the impacts on fundamental rights is one of the aspects that we are working on and also investigating, and that's why it's also important to hear from the victims themselves, since we always have the feedback of a huge chilling effect on their work, on their lives, because it's not only their professional lives but also private lives that are being violated, and the right to privacy, to freedom of expression. So amongst the victims, we also know there are political opponents, so the chilling effect is also true for the political opposition, on lawyers that have the right to be protected as their clients' rights also. And so this is one of the important aspects of our investigation. Cornelia already mentioned in the recommendations the importance to have strong safeguards, access to remedy and justice for the victims. We also think it's important to put in place a EU citizen lab in order to help to support people, journalists, lawyers, political opponents, to have their phones, their devices checked if there is suspicion of being wiretapped. This is currently completely missing in the EU. There's no such support, and we always hear also from the victims that they feel really lonely, and this is even more true in the 4 countries where we know there are known cases of wiretapping with spyware such as Predator or Pegasus, because those are not the only ones. Unfortunately, there are many others. And in those member states, as mentioned before, we have little access to information because the authorities are absolutely not collaborating with our inquiry committee, not willing to collaborate with the EU at all, since the Commission received answers from those member states saying basically that if there has been such a use of spyware, it's in the name of national security. And so it means the story ends there, and there's nothing to talk about or give more information. This is lately also the answer we got from the Secret Service representative we heard during our hearing this week on the Catalan gates. We didn't get any answer because of national security reasons and secrecy. And so we need to define better what is national security and what is allowed under national security and what is not allowed, and also have strong safeguards in place, such as ex ante, ex post democratic control, judicial authorizations, and so on. So I've been talking about the 4 member states. We know that spyware such as Pegasus is more broadly in the hands of our governments. At least 14 member states in the EU have acquired Pegasus. We know that. And now the question is how, and it's been used by who, and how this data is also being stored or used. And finally, there's also a huge international dimension to this file, since we know that third countries have been spying on EU citizens, including politicians, such as President Macron or the Prime Minister Sanchez in Spain. And this led to almost no reaction. And so this is also why this inquiry work at the parliamentary level is so important, because we see very few reactions from the member states on the one hand, and from the EU Commission on the other hand as well. We've asked the Commission several times to have information about the wiretapping inside the institution, no answer. We've asked the Commission and Europol to investigate and to be able to collect evidence in order to avoid evidence to be deleted, including in Greece, since every week there have been revelations on new wiretapping, and so far the reaction and the action is minimalistic, to say the least. I'll finish also by mentioning, and we've seen it during our mission in Greece, the left has seen it during your mission in Spain also, and during the hearings. In the process of our work, there's a huge national influence also on our work, influencing the guest speakers we can invite during their hearings, and a clear willingness to try to silence and not to cooperate with our investigative committee. And so all those elements, of course, will be worked on in the report. So we have the draft report of the rapporteur, and now it's our work to amend it for our group. For our green group, it's Aina Neumann, that you probably know very well over there, that will be our shadow and working on the amendments. And we're quite aligned on the fact that we need a general moratorium, immediate moratorium, on those technologies leading to a ban, and the use, if exceptions, this use must be really extremely restricted to strict conditions, and which I doubt can actually be met. We also want worldwide moratorium on the use, transfer, sale of those technologies, strengthened rules also when it comes to exports to countries where the rule of law, democracy, human rights violations are not problematic, I would say. And as long as a common framework is not in place at international level, we cannot tolerate any further use of those technologies. And finally, and Cornelia already mentioned that, the obligation for the member states to report vulnerabilities, to enforce a very robust framework. So, to conclude, thank you for being here with us. Thank you to the speakers we will hear in a minute. It is really crucial to raise awareness about those questions of security and fundamental rights, and also to have more public debates, because it's a real democratic question. It's highly related to the rule of law and the backlash we can see in several member states. So there's a need for public debate, and today is, of course, an opportunity to have a debate. So have a nice debates and exchanges, and see you in a while. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So then let's start on the panel, which I would like to briefly introduce. So we have Natalia Krapiva from Access Now. She's tech legal counsel there. Access Now is one of the organizations that is covering the matter on Pegasus and other spyware since a couple of years. And this is why we invited her. And she will later set a little bit the stage of what have happened. Then we have Karine Kanimba. She's the daughter of Paul Rouzes Zabagina, and she quit her job after her father was abducted in Dubai and imprisoned now in Rwanda, and leading the campaign to free him, which she will also explain about later. Then we have Aboubakar Jamai. He's originally from Morocco, but in exile now in France. He's an investigative journalist, and as Karim, they are both victims of Pegasus. And then we have Hannes Munzinger. He is now working with Paper Trail Media and with Spiegel, and he had uncovered and investigated and uncovered the story of Karin, so they are both very well connected. At that time, Hannes was working for the Süddeutsche Zeitung, so if you want to read his story, you will find it there. So thank you very much for being. I would like to start to ask you, Natalia. As I said, Access Now is observing, investigating, and dealing with the matter of Pegasus and other spyware since a couple of years. Could you a little bit explain, like recap, what is Pegasus, what is NSO, and what did Access Now did since then?
Sure. Well, it's not just Access Now. There's several organizations at least have been involved in uncovering these abuses facilitated by Pegasus. But NSO, I think most of you probably know, is an Israeli company that produces this spyware called Pegasus. And from what we know about this spyware is that it's basically infects your device, your phone or iPad, and basically surveils, has access, takes control of everything on the phone, from your messages to your microphone, your video, and has access to the entirety of your device, which, as we all know, we basically live our entire lives, professional, personal, on our phones these days. And this is something that is really an unprecedented amount of information that a government or whoever else is using this is able to receive from infecting your phone with this spyware. And another part of it is that it's also often silent, right? It's a so-called zero-click method that you don't even know that you infected. Sometimes you do receive a message. There's been actually instances of that. But lately, Pegasus is using the zero-click method where you don't even know, you don't receive any kind of notification or a link that you click, and then your phone gets infected. So this abuse is facilitated with this kind of spyware, have been documented publicly at least since 2016. Citizen Lab research group based in the University of Toronto in Canada, they uncovered the targeting of UAE human rights defender Ahmed Mansour in 2016. And then after that, there were dozens of cases. Some of you may have heard, but I think it's mostly the digital rights community that were mostly following it. There were infections of New York Times journalist, Amnesty International staff member. There were 2017 Mexico investigations where politicians, public health advocates, journalists investigating cartels and their family members were targeted with Pegasus. And then, of course, the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi was another major and tragic development in these investigations, where his associate Amar Abdulaziz was infected with Pegasus, as Citizen Lab documented shortly before Jamal's murder. And then, of course, the major scandal with WhatsApp, when WhatsApp announced that their users, at least 1,400 users of WhatsApp were targeted with Pegasus. And a Citizen Lab revealed at least 100 of civil society members out of those 1,400 were targeted. And Abu Bakr is actually unfortunately one of the victims of that attack. And subsequently, WhatsApp filed a lawsuit against NSO as a result for this violation, which is currently pending potentially at the Supreme Court. And then, of course, the Pegasus project, right? The Amnesty International that revealed at least 50,000 potentially 50,000 numbers that were selected for targeting by Pegasus, and they belong to state officials, business people, but also journalists, lawyers, human rights defenders. And I think the Pegasus project really brought the issue of Pegasus to the public on a big scale. And then followed subsequent revelations when a lot of those allegations were also confirmed with forensics. We know that also Apple released their notifications and also sued NSO in the United States. And as a result, we had a series of revelations in Poland, Hungary, Rwanda, El Salvador, as Access Now has been part of that investigation. And I just want to, note, the effect on the human rights of the people and lives of the people has been tremendous. Obviously, we see the violation of privacy, violation of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, because often this spyware is used to retaliate and against journalists, human rights defenders, anybody opposition who's critiquing the government. And then it's silencing them. It puts them in a state of constant fear. So this is something that is highly toxic and damaging. And honestly, I was this past weekend at visiting a Stasi museum, which it was my second time, but each time I learned something. And it was just incredible thinking about how much surveillance was done and how many people, something like 2% of the population were spies. But I thought, well, with Pegasus, actually, you don't need so many people. You can just have a Stasi officer on your phone, right here, and it will have access to much more than even Stasi or KGB could. And just thinking about how destructive it is for human lives and societies to have this kind of surveillance by governments. So it's really, it's extremely harmful and toxic for human rights and democracy and the very fabric of a human society.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if like lawyers, journalists, and opposition, which are like the pillars of democracies, are targeted, so then, of course, that's of great concern. So thanks for this introduction. You also mentioned the important organizations in investigating the matter. So it was like Citizen Lab from Canada, it was Amnesty Tech. They both have technical tools. Could you briefly explain the technical tools and perhaps the difference of them?
Well, I cannot speak. I think they would be better at explaining their methods and tools. They use slightly different. I think people sometimes get confused. They use different methods, but they come out with similar results, the same results. Often they verify each other's work. But it's a different organizations and they use different methods. Amnesty International, Amnesty Tech, they do have a publicly accessible tool called MVT that anybody can use. However, it shouldn't be confused for the actual forensics, because I think you could compare it with like a rapid test for COVID, right? Where you go, you do a rapid test, and it will tell you quickly whether there's infection. But in order to really confirm, right, you would need a PCR or something, right? So this is the same. So usually when somebody uses this MVT method, they would get an initial screening and they might get evidence of infection, but then it will always have to be confirmed either again by Amnesty or Citizen Lab that there is in fact the infections and the dates and on all the details. So I think it's something that is very useful for us to have, because you don't have to be necessarily a forensic expert to do this kind of initial. You can just buy this at-home rapid test. But definitely for things like litigation or any kind of subsequent action based on this, usually the organizations, and again, we work with them, Access Now, Frontline Defenders, other organizations or journalists, they would always work with these two organizations, which currently are really the leaders, world leaders really on Pegasus forensics, and so it's good to then work with them so that they could confirm and present it, whatever for the court or for whatever proceedings is necessary.
Yeah, and these organizations are always up also to be contacted if people suspect their phones to be infected. So the comparison with COVID quick test and PCR is, I like it very much, so it gives me also the opportunity to pass over to Hannes, because after the quick test of WhatsApp, for example, you made the PCR investigation, you were part of the journalistic network. So could you a little bit briefly describe, so how did you came to the matter of Pegasus?
Yes, of course, but we also worked with Amnesty and Citizen Lab, of course, because they have the most expertise, but we divided up the work. So when the Pegasus project started, it all started with basically this already mentioned list of 50,000 potential targets, which were only potential targets in the sense that there was this hypothesis that these were selected to be targets of Pegasus, and our job as the people who got called to the Pegasus project was to actually get these people on the record and convince them that they would need to get the phones checked and confirm the actual infection. And all this was organized mainly by Forbidden Stories, which is an investigative organization in Paris. They are a small team with very good investigative reporters, and so they called together this team of international investigative journalists from Washington Post, The Guardian, Le Monde. We were at Süddeutsche Zeitung, part of the team, Die Zeit in Germany, but also journalists who previously had been known victims of Pegasus, for example, in Mexico, and for example, from The Wire in India. And others were part of the team that became later aware that they were targeted by Pegasus, for example, in Hungary, our colleagues from Direct 36. And so we were brought together and started to identify the people basically on that target list and try to make sense of this selection of people. And of course, if you have a list in that size, you try to look for patterns, and so if you look at the victims, you get a sense who the attacker could be, and that's how we went on and drew a picture of who could be the attackers, who are the victims, and who could we go out and talk to. And that's what we did, like talking to people, establishing contact. Some of them we already knew, friends, other journalists, but also, of course, a lot of human rights activists, lawyers, activists all over the world. And then we just started to contact them and ask them the weird question, can we look at your phone?
And how many people did you try to contact? Or, I mean, there was this leaked list of 50,000, and then you had to figure out who could that be, and how did the people react?
I mean, the focus of Forbidden Stories is always mostly on journalists. So they are an organization that that helps journalists under pressure, helps journalists that have been attacked physically or put under pressure not to publish something or even killed. And try to follow up on the work in the sense that if you silence one, you get 50 others who do the work. And so that was the first main focus, but on the way we realized, okay, there are a lot more interesting cases. And I mean, in the end, I think it was a few hundred people we contacted, and yeah, I don't have numbers, but it was like a few hundred we contacted, and then got some 3-digit confirmations of infections. Yeah.
Well, that's a lot. So 2 of the people who were targeted by Pegasus or with Pegasus were Karin and her father Paul. So how did you find them, basically?
I actually don't know if your father's phone was attacked, but so as I said, we looked at these clusters that somehow made sense, because if you look through a list of 50,000 names, you realize, okay, these 50 names are known as being activists from Rwanda or from somewhere else, and I looked at the Rwandan names, and then I thought, okay, it would make sense if the enemy number 1 of the Rwandan government would be attacked as well, and so I just took the long shot and made contact with Karin, and then we met. We had a first call, which was probably listened to by the Rwandan government. We don't know, but most likely. And then at some point we met, and I tried to explain why it would make sense for you to give your phone to some stranger from Germany.
So, Karin, that was the first time you were informed that you might have been targeted, or?
So, given what we know about the Rwandan government, its tactics and transnational repression, we had some thoughts that it could be targeting us, our family, or other people in general. When Hannes reached out to me, I think first on the phone he said, "You cannot tell this to anyone." And everything we've been working on with my family and team to get my father freed from wrongful detention in Rwanda is very sensitive. So, and especially engaging with strangers about my phone specifically is very sensitive. So I was worried. I wasn't sure whether even discussing the fact that I could have my phone checked by a person could be a problem for the efforts that we were leading. But I did not think that the Rwandan government would spy on me, would infect my phone with the virus. But I did have some thoughts that they do use these methods.
Would you perhaps briefly explain the case of your father? I mean, at that time, so both of you before lived in Belgium, and he was then abducted in Dubai. Could you briefly explain it?
Yes, I think this context is really important. So you may have heard of my father through the movie Hotel Rwanda, which shows the movie was made in inspiration of his role during the Rwandan genocide in 1994, when he saved the lives of 1,268 people in his hotel. He risked his own life every single day during the genocide to do so, and ended up saving many people. Several years later, the movie was made about his heroism, and he acquired an international platform that he then used to bring attention to the Rwandan dictatorship, to the human rights abuses in Rwanda, and calling for both reconciliation and peace in the Great Lakes region of Africa. As an advocate, as a human rights activist, he was targeted for many years. They attempted to assassinate him in Belgium. They followed him at conferences, universities, wherever he would go out and speak out on behalf of the people who have been silenced by the regime. In 2020, while he was traveling through Dubai, he was abducted by the Rwandan government and brought to Rwanda forcefully. He was an agent of the Rwandan government, was used essentially to lure him, who worked to gain his trust for 2 years in order to get him to Dubai, and eventually they kidnapped him, tortured him upon arriving in Rwanda for a few days, and then paraded him in front of the media. He was then tried on completely fabricated charges, denied all of his most basic human rights, including his rights to defense, his rights to have lawyers. He was held in solitary confinement for months at a time, and then convicted to 25 years in prison. And so since 2020, I was working in New York City in finance, and I quit my job in order to continue to advocate in order to bring attention to my father's case, to call for support from international governments around the world, organizations, people, so that he could be freed and come home. And in doing so, I had to also speak out in the same way that he did for the past 20 years, calling out the Rwandan government for having abducted my father, exposing what they were doing to him every day, and how his rights were being violated, not only his, but also the hundreds of other and millions of other people actually who have been victims of the Rwandan government. In doing so, I too then became a target, and this is when Hannes reached out to me.
Yeah, and I mean, you spoke out loudly also to many other media, so there were reports also, so I read it in Politico, for example. And so what happened after that? So what impact did your decision to go public and meet with journalists and tell your story, what impact had it on the case, the campaign?
You mean prior to the Pegasus reveal or after the
After you spoke out, so did it change anything?
Yes, in that people were able to see the methods that the Rwandan government uses. Rwanda, for instance, is one of the most aid-dependent countries in the world. About 70% of its national expenditure comes from foreign aid. We know the software to cost millions, and they found the software in my phone, so this shows that the Rwandan government, the way it's using foreign aid and humanitarian aid, and this is why it's important for policy officials around the world to reconsider the money that goes to Rwanda, given the types of activities, illegal activities that are involved in.
So the problem of both of the forensic softwares from Citizen Lab and from Amnesty is it doesn't indicate who was using Pegasus, so who is the attacker. So this could possibly NSO, the manufacturer, could do, so they might have records. But so there is still no confirmation if Rwanda is possessing the software or not, or how did they react after the reports? Did they deny or did they confirm it?
Yeah, so there are many other Rwandans who were found to be on the list, and even in a few years prior with the WhatsApp project revealed other Rwandans were also on the list of targets, and all of them, of course, are related to human rights, are speaking out against the regime's human rights abuses, and so we can make the conclusion that, I mean, and frankly, I'm in my mid-20s and have never done anything wrong. There's no other government in the world besides the one that kidnapped my father and tortured him that would come after me for speaking out. So I have strong reasons to believe it's the Rwandan government, but it's also important to realize that while the Rwandan government was, I would say the Rwandan government was spying on me, I wasn't the only victim in doing so. For instance, one of my meetings with the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs was entirely, the software was active in my phone throughout the entirety of the meeting. The moment I walked into her office until the moment I walked out. Some exchanges with all my emails, of course, and exchanges with government officials in the United States as I tried to plead for everyone to put pressure on the regime to release my father. And so in the end, many people end up being targeted, and many people end up feeling unsafe because of this.
Yeah, this is really a problem that most of the governments do not confirm, or if they do it like in secret committees, for example, and there is also now a disinformation campaign starting. So of course we cannot prove who was the attacker, but there are strong indicators in your case and the case that we will hear now after from Abu Bakr. And it's also in the European Parliament when the Pegasus inquiry, recently there was a hearing about Spain, and the former Minister of Interior, he is now as a member of the European Parliament, he was trying to explain or the investigating organization. Well, he didn't use the word liar, but he was a little bit trying to explain that they don't know what they are doing, what they are talking about. So there is kind of a disinformation campaign ongoing as well. So Abu Bakr, could you perhaps explain a little bit the situation in Morocco and your case, and also what brings us to the conclusion that the Moroccan regime is behind the attack?
Sure. Thank you, Matthias. So first of all, let me start by saying I'm far from being the most victimized Moroccan by the Moroccan regime and Pegasus. But unfortunately, those who are much more worthy than me to be with you today here are in jail in Morocco, and that's the reason why I feel obligated to come here and to talk about Pegasus. I also have to confess that I was a little bit surprised when, in fact, Citizen Lab informed me, I think in 2019, that my phone had been infected by Pegasus, and WhatsApp then officially informed everyone, all of those who have been spied on through Pegasus, that this happened, because I have been for some time a publisher and editor in Morocco of a news magazine called Le Journal Hebdomadaire, and which had been through a lot of problems, been banned twice, etc., and I've been forced out of the country back in 2007. And then the magazine was shuttered definitively in 2010, and the way they got rid of me was through hammering me with bogus defamation cases, at the conclusion of which I had to pay huge sums that I couldn't pay. So as of today, I can go back, and I do go back to Morocco, but I cannot make a living in Morocco. I cannot own anything in Morocco because I have been sentenced so many times to these huge fines in these cases. But friend of mine and colleagues are today in jail. One of them is Omar Radi, and it has been proven that his phone had been infected by Pegasus. And the Moroccan case is very interesting for many reasons. The first one is a pretty sophisticated nexus of repression, because the information that is harvested by what I believe, and I believe what Forbidden Stories and Amnesty International have demonstrated, because they are pretty conclusive in the fact that Morocco was behind spying not only on Moroccan activists but also on Emmanuel Macron, on Pedro Sanchez, etc. So it makes a lot of sense to me, and you know, I'm not an expert on the technical part of it, but it seems to me pretty solid. Beyond harvesting all this information, the Moroccan regime now is using a very nefarious system by which it has set up front news media that might seem legitimate in Morocco. There are a couple of them which are organically related to the secret services. And what happens is, through the information they are harvesting, the very intimate information they get, they feed them to these defamation machines, and they use them against activists. They attack their family, they attack their private life, etc. Omar Radi, for example, before he was thrown in jail, it was announced to him by one of these media that he will go to jail, and they even said the day he would be imprisoned. They advertised his account, his banking account numbers. They were advertised there, and there is no way these news media outlets would have gotten this information through their own means. So they very probably the Moroccan regime secret services have fed them this information. The second reason why Morocco is interesting is that, and I guess the same way a little bit, the case of Rwanda a little bit, it's a Western country's darling. So one has to ask, and I'm here also today to say that this regime has accomplices, and these accomplices are in Germany, are in Brussels, are in France, are in the United States. I heard some puzzlement about the fact that nothing is being done. Well, it's not being done because the Moroccan regime is considered as an ally of these Western countries, and the Moroccan regime knows that full well. So it knows that if push comes to shove, at the end of the day, the decision that will be made by the German government, I had some personal experience of that, by the way, the French government, the American government will side with the regime because there are international corporations investing in Morocco, because there is this international cooperation against terrorism. For all of these things, the Moroccan regime knows that. And by the way, I need to remember, because it's still, actually, this is something still current, Morocco was one of the countries that had black sites. In other words, Morocco was one of the countries where the CIA had subcontracted torture. So all of that, and this, I think one of the main questions we need to ask ourselves today, why are regimes like the Rwandan regime, the Moroccan regime, feel empowered to basically use with abandon this system, not only against their own activists, but also against their allies. And the buck stops in here in Berlin, stops in Brussels, stops in Washington, etc.
Yeah, perhaps let's go back again on your case. Like, what? I would also be interested in the experience with Germany that you mentioned. But what I would also like to know is, like, how did it impact your work as a journalist? I mean, that after you found out that your phone was hacked, and I mean, everybody else noticed it as well, and I could imagine that it was also difficult for people like to approach you. I mean, journalists are very much dependent on sources, and if people might know that journalists are being bugged, so yeah, what's happening?
So it shouldn't come as a surprise to you if I say that I have been a journalist for 10 years in Morocco, and I always operated under the idea that I was spied on, because otherwise you go crazy. I mean, if you try to be cautious, not to say things, etc., it's unbearable psychologically. It's impossible. So that's why what I say privately, I try to be able to say it publicly in general. Now, there is a difference between then and now. And the difference is that then we didn't have the smartphones, we didn't have all of this. So basically it was mostly landlines, or most of the time when we talk to our sources, so we would be careful that way. Now with smartphones and the fact that I'm outside of the country, what it did is that it poisons your relationship with with your family members, with your friends. Because what happened since the late 90s and early 2000s is that the Moroccan regime has become more authoritarian than it used to be. And it has been using, there was a story in The Economist that cannot be suspected of being anti-Moroccan regime about the fact that the Moroccan secret services have planted a camera in the bedroom of one of the Moroccan activists and filmed him in an intimate situation and publicized that with his family members. That's in The Economist. That's not in some French media. So when people know that, and of course your family knows that, they're afraid to talk to you. So it really pollutes your relationship with your environment. You cannot talk to your brothers, to your sisters, to your mom, to your parents normally, and you get afraid for them because they are associated with you. And this is, I guess, in my case, the most difficult part. Is not for me because I have been used to it. I've been through this when I was in Morocco. So I'm psychologically kind of prepared for that. But when you see that your kids, I have kids who are teenagers and young adults, I'm afraid when they go to Morocco because I don't know what can happen to them. Because so this kind of fear is really taxing psychologically speaking.
This is what we were also told by Aminatu Haidar. She's also from Western Sahara, Morocco. And she also explained like how this is influencing her personal life, like the communication with her friends, with her family. You can read her interview on the website of Connie Ernst. You mentioned other cases. I read there were at least 8 cases of journalists in the Middle East, North Africa region, and 7 of them were from Morocco. Is this the number?
Yes, I mean, the numbers I've read are absolutely insane. And the one question I keep asking myself is how can Morocco afford that financially speaking? Because I've been looking at the numbers, maybe Natalia knows about that, but it's $650,000 per 10 phones spied on. So, the number I have in mind is that Morocco is probably spying on 6,000 phone numbers. For example, they found out that 2,000 Algerian phone numbers were spied on by Morocco, or there is a strong suspicion, according to Forbidden Stories and Amnesty and what Le Monde, the French newspaper, has been writing. So one of the main questions is who funds that, and I don't think the Moroccan government and the Moroccan state has the wherewithal, or in that case, even maybe the Rwandan regime, you just mentioned the 70%. So the question that we need to ask ourselves, how that happened. And one of the first, countries we can think of is the country of origin of NSO, because Pegasus is a weapon-grade software, which means that before NSO can sell it to anyone, it means that the Ministry of Defense in Israel accepts that the sale happens, so they know. So this is one. I'm here just floating hypothesis. So one is that Israel is basically helping its friends in the region, and I know that Rwanda is pretty supportive of Israel. There was a vote a few days ago on simply stating that the occupied territory are occupied, and Rwanda, I think, abstained or voted against or something like that. There were like 4 or 5 countries who did that: Israel, the US, Nauru, and etc. The second suspicion is vis-a-vis Gulf countries, because and this is another important take on this issue, is that when the Arab Spring happened, some Gulf countries have been very vocal and very active in trying to stem these waves of insurrections, of demands of democracy in the region. Of course, they use the boogeyman of Islamism. I'm not saying it's not there; it's there, but it has been overused as a danger. So there is also the suspicion. And the reason I'm saying this is goes into the same idea I mentioned earlier, that if we want to fight this, we need to look for the accomplices. We need to ask ourselves how these regimes, the Rwandan regime, the Moroccan regime, were empowered, were funded to do what they did. Especially, we're not talking about North Korea. We're not talking about Russia. We're talking about countries that are considered as Western countries' friends.
But what was the German experience that you mentioned?
Well, it's.
I mean, Germany is also known to operate Pegasus, so it's
no. It's not related to
police
Pegasus.
And the
it's not related to Pegasus. It's related to the fact that there was an experience that might be anecdotal to you guys, but in which I have been very, very disappointed in the German government. It so happens that I lived in Berlin for a few months in 2013. I was what they call a Richard Weizsäcker fellow with the Bosch Foundation, and I was based here in Berlin. And while I was here, I was also part of a news media venture in Morocco, a website news venture called Lekum. And my colleague, we were 2 founders, and my co-founder, who was based in Morocco, was arrested while I was here. And he was charged with bogus charges of terrorism, supporting terrorism, etc. So I had to cut short my fellowship here in Berlin and try to basically summon support for my friend who was in jail in Morocco. And I managed to. The European Parliament allowed me to. I had a meeting with the commission working on North Africa. Which was a wonderful surprise to me, even Le Quai d'Orsay in France, which generally is very supportive of the Moroccan government, accepted to hear me out. I went to the US, I met with the State Department, and I don't know if you know where the Bosch Foundation is based, but it's literally 200 meters from the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They wouldn't want to talk to me. The German Minister of Foreign Affairs didn't want to talk to me, whereas I was able to go to the US, meet with the State Department, etc., etc. And at that time, the German government had this rosy-tinted view on Morocco because of, I think the German government actually wrote an article on that. it's not the most current number, but gave almost $1 billion in aid if you add everything to Morocco. So there is this view that Morocco is very advanced, very liberal, etc. And I would suggest that you go ask now today the Ministry of Foreign Affairs what they think of Morocco, because things have soured. I don't know if you followed the relationship between Morocco and Germany, but a year ago, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Morocco has instructed all Moroccan NGOs, government organizations not to take one dime from Germany, because Germany, well, it's a very complicated story. It has to do with the Western Sahara, but not only. It had to do with the fact that there is a dual citizen, German-Moroccan citizen, who's based here in Germany, who is suing Morocco for torture, and that fortunately the German judicial system is independent, so he's being heard out and he's winning his cases, even against the German government, because he was delivered to the Moroccan Secret Services by the German Secret Services. And the Moroccans were upset because they felt that the Germans did not cooperate, and they should, because they worked with the German Secret Services on this so-called terrorists, that the German government will not allow this man here.
Let's get back to this geopolitical
so
later.
That's
in
okay.
the next round.
You asked me to,
yeah,
to
sorry.
talk about Germany.
No, I was just wondering myself if there is any connection to Germany, because, as I said, the police and the federal intelligence, which is the foreign secret services, operating Pegasus as well. And yeah, so a little bit back to this, how journalists are affected. Hannes, could you perhaps explain a little bit, like, why is it so dangerous if journalists are being targeted with Pegasus? And is this something that Forbidden Stories or the Pegasus project is dealing with? So I understood that you are mostly interested in journalists, I assume also because they are journalists, and this is very dangerous.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's it just everyone stops talking to you if you are a known victim of Pegasus, because then you can't share secrets with the journalists, and that's what investigative journalism is all about, to take the courage and share a secret. And I think it's a part of the strategy of these regimes to silence these journalists through making their work impossible, because they are known to be attacked with the software. And I mean, we've seen the similar strategies in different countries. You mentioned someone who got filmed in the bedroom. We have seen that with one Pegasus victim as well in Azerbaijan, for example, Khadija Ismailova, who were threatened with such things. And these people are basically either completely unable to do their work, or they have to constantly change their phones and get into a lot of trouble to continue their work. And both these outcomes are good for the governments threatening them. So it's a weapon to silence journalists. That's my opinion. Yeah.
And Karin, how did it affect you, like as a person? I mean, before you described like how it affected the campaign. But I mean, you mentioned it very briefly. Let's give it a little bit more attention. Like that, also your conversation was obviously tapped by Pegasus. I mean, how long was the period that that Pegasus were active on the phone, like as you assume?
How long? So what we know is that it was first infected in January, and then of 2021, and then the last time they conducted forensics analysis on that old phone, which I no longer use, it was in July, and there was several infections throughout the entire period. We also learned that the day Hannes came to see me in Brussels, that day it was being hacked as well. It was being attacked as well. So this is quite interesting, the coincidence of me meeting with him about it and them and trying to infect my phone. The way that it's impacted my life, you know, I'm very scared, frankly. I have to try to be brave myself because we are trying to get my father out of prison. So I cannot hide away, but frankly, there are many places that I no longer go. There are many people who no longer talk to me. When they come into my house, I think we started this when Hannes came over. We put everyone's phones in the microwave because it makes people feel safer. Even for a while, I used before, in preparing for interviews and conversations with my lawyers and so on, I would sometimes record my thoughts on voice records so I can come back to it because many ideas were coming up, and that means that they've had access to my thoughts. They've had access to all my photos, all my calendar, my friends, I have zero privacy. And now, as he mentioned, I also live under the feeling that I am always being spied on. And we actually learned that I have two phones. I've had two phones since I moved back to Brussels, and we learned that there were traces of Pegasus on my US phone. There were traces, my US phone wasn't infected, but the traces carried over from my Brussels phone via iCloud. And a few months ago, Citizen Lab also learned that my cousin in Brussels, who lives in the same house as me, his phone was also infected. So now we have two phones in the same household that are being spied on. It's very, very scary, especially since this is, we think, from the same people who kidnapped my father and tortured him and are holding him hostage. So my fears now are, is this going to happen to me next?
Yeah, and in the articles I read, the interviews you gave, like the phone was also very important for you. I mean, you did lots of the campaigning by using your phone, no? That's what I read.
Yes, yes, and I spent days and months calling members of the European Parliament, members of the Belgian Parliament, the US government. I tweet a lot, which surprisingly bothers the Rwandan government terribly, and so I do a lot of, in order to continue to get people to remember my father's name, because as a political prisoner, it's important to keep talking about him, because then he's forgotten, and the regime essentially succeeds in destroying him. And so I've continued to do my best to advocate on social media, to get people to speak out. And so after this happened, I was almost afraid of even holding a phone. And this is part of the vital thing that is keeping my father alive. And so I could not stay away for too long, and I had to get new phones, and that also took time away in trying to figure out security and all these things. And frankly, I wish I didn't have to think about it. I wish I didn't have to worry about being followed on the streets or being tracked via GPS by the same people who, again, kidnapped my father. So it has changed my life a lot. And that's why I'm speaking out today, because I don't think anyone should be victimized in this way and should feel the way that I feel.
Do you have any idea how your phone was infected? So if I'm not mistaken, at that time it was not known that it's already working as a zero-click, or did it?
I don't know. What I know is that what I understand, and that my technological understanding of this is very limited, but what I think is that it was a message that arrived in my phone, which I never saw, from an email address via iCloud or iMessage, and it was reinfected several times. Maybe you have more details. But yes, I never knew about it, and I never realized it, and even I think. If my new phone today had Pegasus again, I probably wouldn't know unless I have Amnesty Tech or Citizen Lab also check it again.
Abu Bakr, do you know how you were infected?
The Citizen Lab told me how it happened. I received, this is what's really scary. I received WhatsApp video calls from a Dutch number and I didn't even have to answer. The mere fact that they called me, they were able to infect the phone. That's what's really scary. So that's how little it takes to have your phone infected.
I think maybe I can add to that.
Please.
It's very important to understand that these are not tools that are available just in one version. So they keep developing, they keep moving, they keep buying zero-click infections that they then use. If one is burned, if one is discovered, they have others to implement into their tool and to continue doing the same, just with other exploitation methods.
So one piece of advice, always update your software. Whenever you receive a message from Apple or from WhatsApp to update, because what it means is that they're killing the zero-click one. So
And
that's one of the biggest lessons I got from this.
In the lockdown mode, for those of you who are doing human rights work or journalists, if you have Apple phone, use the lockdown mode. This is a measure that was specifically implemented as a result of what happened, and so it could help as well to protect your phone or let you know that actually you might be targeted.
Could you, Natalia, perhaps also explain us a bit like the role of the US? So when I understood you right, Karin, you said that you might have been also targeted at the time when you were in New York. But as far as I understood, now that's not technical, that's not possible.
So the Amnesty International explained that through the forensics report, it showed that while I was in Boston, in the United States, they attempted to infect my US phone, my Belgian phone, which I had with me in the United States. So it was an attempt, but it's not a success. My US phone carried traces of the spyware that were carried over through iCloud via my Belgian phone. So it wasn't my US phone that was directly targeted in this case.
So yeah, so I think what you're talking about is that NSO claimed that their Pegasus or spyware is unable to infect a certain phone number. So for example, US, or I think Russian, they say, or actually they used to say Israel, but now it's in fact was uncovered that it wasn't true, that the Pegasus is used by Israeli authorities as well. But so those are the claims of NSO, and we have seen again and again that very often that what they say then turns out to be not true. So I also wouldn't necessarily go by what they say. I don't believe that there is any evidence of, in fact, a US number being targeted, but we have evidence of at least US citizens being targeted. And just recently, actually on Wednesday, there was a court case filed by journalists of El Faro, the El Salvadoran publication. This investigation Access Now was involved in. And at least one of the journalists is a US citizen. He was infected with Pegasus, and he and 14 other journalists are now suing NSO because of that in US, in federal court in California. So there's also other instances of US citizens targeted. So I think it's a matter of time until we know also more about this and how it affects people, and because again, like unfortunately, often the United States and Western countries don't really care so much about what is happening abroad, but once it affects their citizens, it all of a sudden matters. I mean, that's just a reality. But there was also another example. The U.S. diplomats were also targeted. It was revealed a while abroad, and that this is another, and this is as a result of that, we believe, I mean, there wasn't official confirmation, but we also think that partially at least that was why United States added NSO to its entity list to the US Treasury Department as one of the measures that US took as a result. And so now it's extremely difficult for US companies to do business with NSO. And it affected NSO tremendously. And they've been trying since then to circumvent those measures. There were attempts to sell NSO to US defense contractor, L3 Harris. Us and our partners in civil society mobilized against this, and looks like successfully the deal was stopped. But certainly there is a lot of pressure. There's lawsuits, as I mentioned one, but there's another one which we have been involved in, the WhatsApp versus NSO. We filed amicus brief, then Apple also filed a case, and there's lawsuits all over the world as well. So there is now, as a result of all of these investigations, there is some hope, at least for accountability, with the PEGA committee inquiry. There is some probes in India and other countries. So definitely NSO is now, and other spyware companies are under pressure, but it's up to us really to keep pushing and really call for accountability.
This is interesting because that's also in Europe quite different. So we were in Spain investigating and meeting like victims and lawyers, for example. And we were told that Spain is really doing nothing. So also the government allegedly was also spied upon, they said, like the prime minister and two ministers. And but they don't act against Morocco, which they suspect to have been the offenders. But this is totally different from France. So could you explain, perhaps, are you aware of this, how the French government reacted on being spied upon probably by Morocco?
Well, the story and you know, one of the problems with this particular issue is nothing has been completely confirmed. So there was a book that was published by two French journalists a few months ago, Georges Malbruno and Chenot, and they claim to quote sources from the La DGSE, which is the French equivalent of the CIA. And what they're saying initially, basically, and I think that's one of the main reasons why there is this, I don't know if you know that, but there are problems today between France and Morocco, some serious issues, which is almost unheard of in these last years. What they claim is that the Moroccan secret services have become a wing of the Mossad in France. That's what this book claims. That and now binationals, French Moroccans working for sensitive industries are being investigated by the French secret services, not because they're spying for Morocco, but they suspect that they're spying for Israel and the Mossad. Beside, the obvious link is that Macron was spied on, ministers were spied on, and the French probably feel a little bit maybe betrayed because they are a very staunch supporter of Morocco. You mentioned the Western Sahara. France is probably the staunchest supporter of Morocco in the UN, supporting the Moroccan case, which is also the case of Spain today, by the way. So to me, this is really interesting because it shows how when you don't put constraints, the system run amok, because what it shows, the Moroccan case shows that if you give this very, very alluring, seductive device that can allow you to spy on anyone, it's very hard to institutionally control it. And this is what happened with the Moroccan secret services, is that they basically started binging on spying to the extent that they are damaging diplomatic relations with allies, which is kind of, you know, hard to understand. But to me, the way I explain it is like being, it's an addiction. You know, when you have this so easy way to spy on people, it's the invisible man complex. You know, when you can spy on everyone, you just keep spying even. And by the way, that's how I explain the fact that I've been one of the victims, because I wouldn't say I'm nobody, but I'm far from being, you know, a big danger to the Moroccan government. So why would they expend their resources on me? You know, I don't feel I'm threatening the Moroccan regime. I teach in Aix-en-Provence. I'm not a journalist anymore. I do a few things here and there, that's all. But what it tells me is that it's so easy to do that they are doing it with everybody.
Yeah, the geopolitical aspect is quite interesting. So I think also it's very helpful to, if you investigate. I mean, this is probably also the answer why Spain is not reacting against Morocco, because Morocco is being needed in terms of migration control. So
Yeah, absolutely. What I don't want to, I didn't want to expand on that, but obviously the obvious reasons that I alluded to a little bit earlier is that Spain today, by the way, is the first, not France, the first commercial partner of Morocco is Spain. People think it's France, no, it's Spain. The immigration control issue is a big one. Some people might not know that, but Morocco has terrestrial borders with Europe that Moroccan contest, but it's Ceuta and Melilla. You know, it's not only about the 16 kilometers between in the Gibraltar Strait. And as you know, it's not only Moroccan immigration, it's really African immigration going through Morocco. So Europe needs the cooperation of the Moroccan government in fighting illegal immigration. I mentioned fighting terrorism, you know, and the Western secret services went very far into, you know, not only allowing, it's worse than allowing, and asking the Moroccan secret service to do nasty things, and that has been documented. So for all these reasons, there is, and by the way, if you just allow me, I think it's important for us as human rights activists to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of the people we are tasked of protecting us. That's the law enforcement, security service, because they are incentivized to do almost whatever it takes to protect us. And then knowing that that leads to these nefarious consequences, how we can put conditions to that. And that's why I'm very happy to be here, if only to tell you how important you are as journalists, as NGOs, as what Natalia is doing with Access Now is absolutely key, because what you allow us to internalize the cost of this relationship. In other words, now the Secret Services of Germany, of the United States, they know that people can sue them in their country. So they have to think twice before just allowing their partners to do whatever it takes. And I think it's a very important conversation that we need to have, recognizing, be realist about what we are expecting from the different sections of the government. And hence, that's why it's very important to do what we are doing today.
okay, thank you very much. I think we can leave the first two rounds like this. I have like some 2-3 more smaller questions, but I think we could now pass it over to you, like as Q&A. So, do you have anything to add, or any questions or comments? How do we do it with a microphone? So, do we have a microphone over there, or should we share one of them? Or should we do it without a microphone and I will repeat the question?
Thank you. Oh, so the question I have to the panelists, do we have any evidence that democratic governments are using the same tools? Maybe legally, they get approved by a judge or something. So do we have any evidence of that, or is only, let's say, despotic governments are using this spyware?
Are there other questions? So we could also collect some.
I guess I can try to answer. If we, I guess the question is, what do you consider democratic, right? Also, but we know that countries in EU, it was actually named 14 countries at least are using Pegasus. The most the scandals that we heard were from 4, right? The Poland, Hungary, Spain, and Greece. Well, Greece, not Pegasus, but another spyware made by Cytrox. So there's plenty of evidence about that, unfortunately, and that shows how destructive Pegasus and this kind of spyware is for democracies. In Poland, it's, I don't know if you read about what happened, how the spyware was purchased. it was actually purchased on money that was supposed to go to victims of crime. You know, when victims get hurt as a result of a crime, they need all kinds of support, medical support, financial support, and the money that's specifically dedicated for that was misused, taken. About something like 5 million euros equivalent was spent on Pegasus, completely out of any kind of oversight, misappropriated, and so that is a huge problem for it's a corruption, and we often see, we find Pegasus and spyware where there is corruption. So it really erodes democracy, erodes rule of law, and it has detrimental effects on society. And we also know, I think Germany actually, I mean, we are in Germany and we speak about Germany. There was I understand that confirmation that in fact Germany uses Pegasus. They do claim, or there were claims that there is a so-called Pegasus Lite version, so it is supposedly more compliant with EU law, which there is a paper came out by the data protection supervisor of the EU that said that it's likely that spyware such as Pegasus is fundamentally incompatible with the EU law, including the law on data protection. And so for that reason, seems like Germany was able to get some kind of a light version. However, there's no evidence, it's completely not transparent. So these kind of claims we're also unable to verify. And this is why I hope that the PEGA committee will be able to shed some light on that and really be able to tell whether this use is compatible with the EU law, and if not, then it needs to be most likely banned. So we would certainly know of democracies using it, but again, the number was called 14, but we don't know the full list. We know Germany, probably Belgium, as the 4 countries that I mentioned, but there's more, and we don't know who they are.
Are there more questions or anything in the chat? For the translators, it would be nice to have it in the microphone.
Yeah, I'm Anke Domscheit-Berg, Digital Policy Speaker for the Left Party in the Deutsche Bundestag, Member of Parliament. On Wednesday, we had in the Digital Committee the Justice Minister for Q&A, and I was asking him what about the, in a speech he mentioned just weeks ago that they would enforce regulation to make it harder for the government to have those types of spyware. He was not explicitly referring to Pegasus, but I was referring to government spywares. And I was asking what's the timeline and how will the regulation most likely look like. He couldn't answer both of them directly or in detail, but he said that they promised this in the coalition contract and they plan to do so in 2023. So we will have an eye on that. This is something I just wanted to share with everybody here. But I also, I was suspecting to be a target of Pegasus or maybe a similar spyware because I got several weeks ago several strange phone calls. It was ringing very shortly and it was nothing in the call history. It just didn't exist, but I heard it and it was several times. And I was told by security experts that this is a known pattern of the Pegasus attack. So we tried to look into it with the BSI. They find some irregularities, but they didn't find specific traces of Pegasus. But the question I would have is, what are potential known patterns you can share so people know what is looking suspect and what not? And what can we actually do? Because I did not feel really comfortable even going to the BSI. This is our federal authority for IT security. So on the one hand, it should be the most trustworthy people at all. But they are, as an authority, depending on the Ministry of Interior, which is also responsible for the spy agencies. So there's a conflict of interest and you can never be sure. And so if somebody has a suspect, what should they do? Where can they go to get help and support and just check? Because it means sharing all your data on the phone, yeah, so.
So, questions on the patterns to perhaps to our PCR experts and also what people can do?
No, I'm not a technician by any stretch of imagination, but I don't know if we all aware of this 0-day issue. I don't know if one of the things I've discovered with this is that there is a black market, worldwide black market of people who are basically looking for vulnerabilities in softwares, in WhatsApp, in everything, in Signal, and etc. And there is a market for that. And in fact, what Pegasus does, it's either finding NSO, what NSO and the like of NSOs, because we can suspect that there are other NSOs. What they're doing is whenever there is an update or there is a new program or an existing program, they look for this, what they call 0 days. 0 days is when they discover the vulnerability. So the reason I mentioned updates earlier, updates are when Facebook, WhatsApp, Signal, they find the vulnerability and they send you a message and they tell you update your app. What they're telling you is in fact that we might have found out a vulnerability. You need to update it. So what I understand with my very limited technical knowledge, it will never end. As long as there are apps and new softwares, there'll be vulnerabilities, and there'll be people. There is a black market for it, and people looking for vulnerabilities. So the only thing that you can do is to update your software continually. And if you realize that there is one particular app which is particularly vulnerable, not to use it. I have been told that iPhones are better than the rest. I'm not sure anymore. But the question that you asked to whom to go, I don't have an answer to that. And this is maybe something that public policy needs to take into account, that to have the government might need to have some administration that concerned citizens can go to and ask for that type of, of control.
Maybe I can add to that. I absolutely agree with you that there is this known market, not only black market but very open companies buying these vulnerabilities and giving people good money for it, actually. But there are also, fortunately, people who get money for patching these vulnerabilities. And it makes absolutely sense to also talk about this and to encourage, like, big tech companies, for example, to run these bug bounty programs where people can share their knowledge about vulnerabilities and get paid for that. And I think that's very important in this race that will always keep going on. If you suspect of being a victim, there are a few organizations, of course. Amnesty Tech are the experts, Citizen Lab. If you're a journalist, you can go to Reporters Without Borders. They just opened a lab in Berlin. But before you go to them, because they are pretty busy due to Pegasus, you should always think, is it plausible that I'm a target? I mean, if you're a member of parliament, it makes sense. But yeah, always think about, is it a realistic thing that I've been targeted? Otherwise you go crazy.
Another advice that I received from Amnesty Tech, and who's actually I see sitting in the audience, is one of the experts, is that in addition to updating your software, is to set disappearing messages on your messaging apps, just so an extra layer of security for yourself.
Yeah, I'll just add, we should talk maybe. I mean, there is people to go to about these issues. Access Now runs a digital security helpline that is free of charge, where we assist with digital security issues, including working with Amnesty International and Citizen Lab, helping scan for spyware. So we don't actually, our main focus is on civil society, so like human rights defenders, journalists. But I know that Citizen Lab, in fact, works with opposition politicians, also helping to uncover this kind of threats to democracy. so we can connect you with them as well. But in terms of, so there are resources certainly to go to, but in terms of how to detect, it's hard because sometimes it is fully silent, the infection. At other times, just based on talking with the victims and helping them detect Pegasus and other spyware, it's sometimes they say, well, the phone is overheated, it shuts off often, although sometimes because you might have like too much data on your phone, it might just also be that. So that's not necessarily the tell sign, but it could be. Another one I heard interesting, that there was a conversation that was recorded, a very sensitive conversation, and when there was infection with spyware, and the victim was telling me, well, I heard that as if somebody's listening like an echo. And again, that could be a reason, some other reason for that. But sounds like that can also be a sign of Pegasus. So that is quite not a satisfactory answer, and it kind of makes you just feel paranoid. But I think, as was said, like it's also, yes, if you are a member of civil society, if you're a politician, it's more likely that you would be targeted better than any sort of person on the street that doesn't do any kind of political or activism work.
Just one thought here. The problem with these patterns is once they are known, they will look for other ways of infection. Once we're talking publicly about patterns, they will look for others. The other thing I wanted to add here is, if you're talking to the Justice Minister again, it would be very interesting to know if these regulations should apply only for the use by the German police or also by the spy agency, because that's a very cynical approach. We have heard that they say, okay, it's fine, we have this light version for the internal use, but when we spy on foreign people, it's fine with us. So that's a very interesting topic as well.
Foreign people and also in other countries. So this is also a ridiculous thing that, for example, if police is operating in a neighbor country or in any third country, they have to ask permission. Otherwise, there will be diplomatic trouble. So police is not allowed to execute like executive powers in another sovereign state, but every secret service does, obviously. So there are no regulations at all for the secret services.
Yeah, I want to add something that I think does not answer directly this question, but this is a debate and a conversation we need to have. There are basically two ways, I'm caricaturing here, but there are basically two ways to go about this phenomenon. One is the legislative route, public policy route. So having lawmakers coming up with rules that are putting constraints on whomever is doing these nefarious things. The other route, which I think is, and these two are not exclusive. I'm all for the lawmaking, public policy approach. But there is another approach, and this is where access now is so important, is that using the market, basically going after these guys, targeting their pockets. To me, it's fascinating, the lawsuit by Facebook, who owns WhatsApp, against NSO, and there were amicus briefs. It was supported in it by all Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, all are supporting Facebook against Meta, against NSO. Why is that? Because this is a cosmic fight internal to what's called surveillance capitalism. Because the business model of all of these platforms is to convince us that our data are safe with them. And what NSO has done is to tell the world that our data are not safe with them. So for them, it's a survival matter, it's an existential threat. They have to react to showcase to all of us that our data are safe with them. In other words, it's very important to support that type of lawsuits, because these companies need to be hammered financially. And Facebook needs to be paying for it, and Amazon needs to feel it financially, and on all of them. So there are these two approaches, and I don't think we should belittle the market approach one, the going, using the judicial system to go after the business model of these companies, and hence the NSO companies, not only the platforms.
I have two more things in mind that popped up that perhaps could be answered by you, Natalia. So First of all, is iPhone more secure than Android phones? So this is what I heard before. Then I heard the opposite, because there are just a few versions of iPhones compared with so many versions of Android combined with different devices. So it's easier to manufacture a spyware for iPhones. So, and the other thing is that was mentioned before about the money. So how much does Pegasus cost for a government, and how many licenses are covered by a certain amount of money? Do you know that?
Yeah, thank you. So the first question, I mean, again, I'm not a technical expert, but my understanding working on these investigations is that it is somewhat more difficult to tell if an Android phone is infected with Pegasus. That's why usually when you hear these kinds of investigations or enforcement actions, it's usually Apple phone, and we know about vulnerabilities that are being mentioned. With Google, Android, we know less. They kind of, and as Abu Bakr said, I mean, it's true that a lot of times tech companies are interested in not just their technology being secure, but also making appearance that they are secure. So they also, I mean, obviously they have done a lot to reveal what's being done, but and sue NSO and so on. But also they are a lot of times would prefer almost for these vulnerabilities maybe not to be as disclosed, because obviously it is hurting their business. So there is kind of a line that they have to walk there. So from what we understand, yes, it's a bit more difficult to tell with Androids, like with WhatsApp. There was, I think, 1,400 infections that they said that they were, but likely if we count Androids, we don't know how many, but likely at least twice as much. So, but Apple phones in general are safe, and I think that's what, again, following what Abu Bakr said, like keep updating. It's always good because they patch vulnerabilities. And the lockdown mode that I mentioned as well could be very helpful, especially you think that you are a target. In terms of the amounts, I have to look back again, the exact numbers, that there were some investigations, and we know the paperwork that was revealed as a result of the lawsuits in terms of the amounts, but it is millions of dollars. It usually goes by like first the 10.
$650,000 for the 10 first, and then it's a sliding scale.
Yes.
But it's a lot of money.
But then there is also, I mean, there's servicing and all that. We know, I think in Poland case, which I mentioned, the money was misappropriated. They said it's something around 5 million euros would be equivalent. But then they said, well, but we don't know in terms of the further servicing, whether that was cost any money and where that money came from, they don't know. So, but it is literally millions of dollars or euros that it costs.
Are there any more interventions from the audience? Would you be up to speak in the microphone?
Thank you all for the great panel and discussions today. I think you gave some very good advice here, and maybe we could add some more from the technical side. My name is Danica, and I work at Amnesty Tech here in Berlin, where we have our security lab doing the forensic investigations, partly with the Pegasus project. And so it's always, I think, an ongoing battle to try and understand how these kinds of surveillance tools are being used. The spyware is changing all the time. The exploits they use changes all the time. And so definitely we would say to people, if they are concerned that their devices are being targeted, they can reach out to us at Amnesty Tech here in Berlin. We're happy to work with civil society and journalists and activists. There's different things you can use to try and figure out if you might be a target. Of course, it depends on your profile. Also, of course, if you, for example, have your conversations being leaked in the media, like we've seen happening in quite a lot in Morocco, then of course you know somebody's getting this information, and maybe they're doing it through my phone. So lots of situational evidence can help you suspect that you may be a target, and then you can come and reach out and see if we can find some technical evidence to confirm that this surveillance happens. Of course, it's always changing. It's a cat and mouse game. So as we develop tools, as we release information, all of the companies will try and change the processes to hide the traces and to not get detected. So we can't necessarily say that somebody is definitely not be surveilled, but we can always try and find what new tactics they're using and try to help bring some accountability to people who are victims of this. But it can't just be on the technical side. We also need a lot of the great work on the European Parliament inquiry, other lawsuits investigations to bring accountability and regulatory change from the legal and policy side too.
Anybody else?
Hello, my name is Anne Roth. I'm a policy advisor in the German Parliament for Die Linke and also an activist in the digital rights community in Berlin. I wanted to say thank you for sharing your stories with us. I think, yeah, that's really great. It's very courageous. And while we're being here, I wanted to ask you if there is anything that we can do to support you, both from the parliamentary angle, but also from the activist point of view.
Anybody else? So yeah, the first comment about like Amnesty Tech offering help in investigating. So I would like to remind that this call is not only hopefully going out to journalists and lawyers, but also activists. I mean, in many countries that do operate spyware, like Poland, for example, Hungary and Greece, they are very hostile against migration, and they are very hostile also against NGOs that are in solidarity with migration. And I'm pretty much sure that these countries are also infecting the phones of sea rescue organizations, for example. One such a case is also known, so like not that the phone was bugged, but that the cabin of a ship was bugged by Secret Service. So thank you very much for that comment. And then there was the question like, what do you expect from us as we are here in Berlin and also in the committees? Like some of us are working in the Committee of Inquiry in the European Parliament. I think this addresses all of you. I don't know who would like to begin. Karin, perhaps?
Thank you for this question. I would say there's two ways to help. There's first on a personal level. As you know, we're advocating for my father, Paul Rusesabagina. You can always contact your government officials and call on them to ask questions to the Rwandan government and ask for his release, but also release all the other political prisoners in Rwanda. And another way to also help is that Germany today is one of the largest donors of Rwanda. And as I mentioned, the software not only costs millions, but also Rwanda is aid dependent, and it's using that money to purchase spywares like this and then spy on European citizens like myself and many other in Europe. And so I think encouraging your government officials to reevaluate this partnership with Rwanda and the government of Rwanda is one way to help.
No, I basically concur with the fact that simply by giving a platform to here in Germany and with the Bundestag, etc., for the people who are being repressed in their home countries is already very important. In the case of Morocco in particular, I think there is some tremendous leverage. And by the way, I think I made it clear that I do understand the constraint that the governments here have dealing with these countries. And I understand that these are democracies and they have a mandate from their citizens to protect them, to create jobs by having a certain kind of economic relationship with other countries, etc., etc. But vis-à-vis Morocco, there is a lot of leverage simply because the EU has given Morocco what's called the advanced status, which is very close to integration, short of integration. And I have been militantly asking for something akin to the Copenhagen criteria being imposed on that. Whenever you sign an advanced status with a country, you at the same time you say, okay, but you need to comply with some of this. And by the way, the answer you will get is, but we are already compliant, because Morocco doesn't say we are an authoritarian regime. You know, if you talk to them, they are democracy and we have a parliament and all of these things. But then they'll have to be true on these things. They have to prove, and thanks to the work of activists, we know that Morocco is not, well, not the activists. You only need to read the constitution, in fact, that Morocco is not a democracy. The Morocco, one of the other, but that's more tricky. But I don't know if you know that. But what makes Morocco a relatively stable country is not the smartness of its leadership. Is the fact that we have the best aid system a country can dream of, and this is basically our workers in Europe mostly, because Morocco receives the last numbers $10 billion a year from our Moroccan people like me, actually, because I am technically a Moroccan worker in Europe. So the survival of the regime in Morocco depends so much on Europe on so many levels. So I think if the EU, and it has to be the EU, because that's the thing, these regimes are playing on the divisions, are playing on the fact that Morocco has been subcontracted to France and Spain. So the Germans are mostly interested in the Eastern European countries. They don't intervene when it comes to North Africa. And that's nefarious because, unfortunately, a big part of the French elites and Spanish elites are compromised with the Moroccan regime, which is not necessarily the case of the Germans, the Swedes, etc. So it's important to me, it's very important that Germany is more vocal in the relationship between the EU and Morocco.
So from my end, I'll remind that we are calling for a moratorium on spyware, use, transfer, and sale of spyware. So this is something that governments and people can call on, demand. We ask for more transparency, for protections to be put in place to protect human rights while government uses any kind of surveillance, not just spyware. And I just want to say how important it is for people in democracies in the West to speak out, because often they have the most impact, because often the technologies are being made, right? Like in the US, a lot of the tech companies, the infrastructure is origin in US. There is also a lot of times the export of this technology happens of spyware from Europe or with US or with some kind of involvement of the governments. And then, so they have a lot of impact, people who live in Germany or US, but then they also don't get as much, I think, affected because, I mean, we say, yes, Germany uses a Pegasus, but I think average person would say, well, you know, they probably use it, in fact, against criminals, and supposedly it's a light version, and it's not going to affect me. Privacy violation for me is something like maybe I get some ads targeting or something like this, so it's not so important. But it is important, I guess, because you have this effect, you can have effect, and the costs for people outside of the West, as we've seen, are much higher. The stakes are much higher. People are not just getting invasive ads on their phone, they literally get killed and tortured and persecuted as a result of violation of their privacy. So people here in Germany, in EU and US have this power to affect what's happening, and they have the lowest costs and they face the least consequences. So that's why it's important to speak out, to demand from their governments, from companies, to ensure that our devices are secure, our laws are in accordance with human rights. And next time when government calls to break encryption on your phone, you know, to have unlimited power to control your device, you know, we have to, each and every one of us has to speak out against this.
May I ask you also, I mean, one of the demands that we heard in the European Parliament in the inquiry was that to set up, to have more transparency and to set up a transparency register, is that the correct translation, register, file? Where all sales must be documented, like from European spyware countries to which other countries they were exported. Would that really help, or doesn't it exist already? I mean, it's dual use. So how does it occur to you in the investigations?
So, from my point of view, it's very hard to investigate these things, and it would, of course, would it help to have more transparency on the sales. But on the other hand, we have that with other weapons, great technology, that it's very hard to follow who sells to whom and how it's being used in the end, because these things are also different. So yes, it would absolutely help, but I cannot imagine that there will be a solution like this where the spy agency actually revealing the tools. That's not something I'm gonna see happening.
I will mention though about dual-use regulation. There was a regulation that was passed by the EU, and us and Amnesty International and other partners have been active in advocating for stronger regulation. Unfortunately, over the years, it has been watered down, and the industry has prevailed, and nation states who were interested in also weakening it prevailed. But still, we have some progress. There's greater transparency requirements. There is better definitions, and so it was passed, and right now it's a stage where it has to be implemented, and we are arguing for the strongest implementation of this regulation. There was also US revealed their updated rules. So it is definitely important, but of course it's up to governments then to make sure it is enforced. So we are going to be watching for that closely to make sure and calling governments to account that they use it to the fullest extent. But in fact, even the older version of the rules was somewhat effective against the Finfisher, right? The German company, spyware company that was investigated by the German prosecutor over the years with the help of ECCHR, in fact, and it was, as a result, company went bankrupt. So definitely there are some effects, but it's not a silver bullet. There's not a single one measure that will solve this issue. We need expert controls, we need litigation, we need investigations and all kinds of measures. And even that may not be fully enough, but I think it's key to really use all available tools in our toolbox to counter this problem.
Yeah, just one thing to add, which can also help is whistleblower protection. So if you have people speaking up, going to journalists, revealing those secrets, it's not the same as a register, but it can also have the same effect.
If I may, let me tell you what not to do, which is not to let this Pegasus story slide away and die away, because in fact, it's a golden opportunity. If it's done well, if there is a serious investigation, if the European Parliament does its job to the fullest, and that the culprits are identified, it will showcase that this is not something that authoritarian regime can get away with. On the contrary, if that's not done, the message that will be sent is that these regimes can get away with that type of thing. So I think this is beyond the very important aspect of coming up with new rules, etc., etc. This Pegasus investigation is absolutely critical to the future of the usage of that type of spyware by authoritarian regimes.
But let me add here that it's not only about authoritarian regimes, it's also about regimes that call themselves democratic, which are, of course, in a way authoritarian, because if they use it against opposition, against activists, against lawyers, against journalists, and this is what happened in the EU, and this is why actually the inquiry was set up. And the inquiry is basically investigating like European countries, but there had been a call a couple of months ago, I think Access Now had been signing it as well, from EDRI to look also like European Digital Rights Initiative, to not focus only on Europe, because here we are also like a little bit more contained, more safe, as you said, like privileged perhaps, but also to look on the countries in the global south. Yeah, so I don't know if we perhaps come to the end of the event. Are there more questions in the audience or anything in the chat that we should connect to? Yes?
Hello, I'm Elsa Rosbach. I'm from the US, but I live here and I'm co-coordinator of the German drone campaign, which was started in 2013. And we have a new issue coming up with drones that there's a plan being launched in the Bundestag from certain parliamentarians in the Defense Department to have the Heron TP fly over Germany. And of course, the Heron TP is a surveillance drone. And the drone issue is long established in Germany and has a lot of support, a lot of anti-drone feeling. A lot of focus has been on armed drones recently. As an activist, is there a reason to bring these together or to keep them apart because they have maybe different solutions in parliamentarian sense and so forth? This is what I would like to ask.
I think they're related, and in fact, actually NSO, one of their other business ventures that they are, I think, have been trying to pivot, and it's interesting, every time they get caught in a scandal with Pegasus, then they promote this story in the media. Oh, but we also have this drone program. They also, NSO has like a drone technology as well. So, oh, well, we use it to secure borders or whatever, something like that. So it's definitely part of this industry, and it's problematic. It could be, especially what we are seeing in EU also. There is this promotion of also drones being used with the facial recognition technology, which is extremely problematic, and to surveil people at the border or elsewhere. So definitely, and the moratorium, the call for moratorium, I don't know if you know, by David Kay, the former special rapporteur on freedom of expression, that has been then echoed by us and other rapporteurs and even states officials. It addresses not just the spyware, but the larger industry surveillance technologies. So definitely it's important to talk about facial recognition, AI, drones, cameras, spyware, and other types of mass surveillance as well. This is all definitely part of the industry, and it's extremely harmful for human rights and right to privacy, freedom of expression, and so on.
I see some other parallels, but with the armed drones. So, for example, as it was mentioned, I think by Abu Bakr, that Pegasus is a cyber weapon, and it's like being sold or not being sold to different countries. And this is a decision, for example, in Israel, it's a decision of the Foreign Ministry and the Defense Ministry deciding on the licenses. And Israel decided to sell the cyber weapon to Morocco, and they also decide to sell drones to Morocco, for example. But for us, perhaps another parallel is more interesting, the proliferation aspect. In the parliament, in the German parliament, we had been advocating for a ban of drones, of armed drones. And the reply of the government was like, well, it's too late. Because so many countries have armed drones and so many countries produce armed drones. And if we don't produce them and if we don't buy them, everybody else will accept us. So to have a ban is basically too late, which I think this argument is not stupid. So, and it's a little bit the same also for the spyware. So we are, I think Connie will, in her concluding remarks, refer on that we are against the spyware. We think it cannot be regulated. But on the other hand, so if there is a ban, if it will be forbidden for European, for example, European companies to sell it to third states, so then other countries will. I mean, this proliferation debate. So.
Yeah, but also you can argue the same for mines or chemical weapons, and nevertheless we had prohibition against those weapons. And yes, it's true they're still being used, but there is a norm against this, that no respectful government, country, right, that wants to abide by the rules, the Geneva Conventions and so on, would use such weapons. So I think I understand this argument, But I think we have to decide, and this is right now the discussion, I think, for the PEGA committee, especially in EU, but also all over the world. Is this, in fact, a kind of weapon that is fundamentally incompatible with human rights and even the rules of war, you know, because we're also seeing now Pegasus, some people are saying, well, you know, Ukraine, which is fighting, you know, maybe we should sell it to Ukraine, and with everything that we need to support Ukraine 100%. But at the same time, it should not be excused to erode standards, cyber norms, cyber standards, human rights, and so on. So there needs to be really a fundamental rethinking. What are we doing here, and is this really damaging at the same level as would be mines or chemical weapons, that we need to really put a ban on it?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Matthias, for mentioning this drone issue vis-a-vis Morocco, because there is a tense situation right now between Morocco and Algeria. And I'm not saying it's the only, Pegasus is the only cause, but you probably know that Morocco have signed what's called the Abraham Accords. And unfortunately, what it did is not promoting peace in the Middle East, which is something that I guess most of us want. But what it led to is this emboldening effect on the Moroccan diplomacy, being more confrontation with the rest, because in their mind, they, especially vis-a-vis the United States, by the way, is by normalizing with Israel, they have their get out of jail card. I mean, basically they can get away with anything if they, you know, because they are perceived as being, you know, close to Israel and etc. Unfortunately, that's what they think. I'm not saying that's what's happening. The problem in terms of proliferation is that Morocco not only is buying drones from Israel, but Morocco is officially building a factory of drones. Now, the Algerians are saying very out loud and very clearly that they feel threatened. You know, those who study IR, they know that story. It's called the security dilemma. Is one country is purporting to defend itself, and it's this effort to defend itself is considered by the other country as offensive, and this country gets more defense and the other perceive it as an offense, and then that's what arms race is about. This is what's happening in these countries, and just by looking at the military budget of both countries, they have doubled last year. Morocco has gone from $5 billion to $10 billion, and Algeria has gone from $10 billion to $23 billion in their military budget. So this is, I'm not saying it's inflammable. I don't believe that we are on the cusp of a war, a hot war between Algeria and Morocco, but this is a tense situation that I think the partners of both countries need to pay attention to, and that is fueled by, you know, this Pegasus thing, because the Algerians, of course, knew that they were spied on by this Israeli software used by the Moroccans. So there is this other very nefarious consequence to Pegasus on top of the human rights violations that we have extensively talked about.
I'll make one remark. When we started on the drone campaign in 2013, oh, I should take the microphone.
For the translation.
You know, we were worried about proliferation in 2013 when we launched the drone campaign, and we tried to do also, we did a global action. It clearly wasn't enough. At that time, only the US, Israel, and Great Britain had used these drones, these armed drones, yeah.
So I think I would more or less leave it like that. So you want to have some concluding remarks? Okay, then Connie, perhaps?
Thank you very much for this debate, for your coming, and I think we have to discuss a lot of points again. I think Morocco, we tried to go to Morocco, but we couldn't enter this country without reasons. It was not possible for me to go to Morocco. They said, yes, you cannot go, and I give you no answer. But on request of our group, we will go to Morocco in June, and it would be hopeful and I think great if we can keep in touch and prepare some things. Not only with a delegation, I think with some interested colleagues from other groups, it would be helpful. Yeah, and we were in Melilla. We could see what has happened there. 400 million euro Morocco got only from the EU to build up the fences. There are a lot of dirty deals, you told it, between the EU and I think forced by Spain, but also France, with Morocco, fishery, the Western Sahara problem, and all is open. Germany closed the eyes day by day. If we speak about Morocco, no, okay, yeah. This is one of our points. The other point is problems is Spain. It was a big fight in the committee to discuss the role of Spain in this scandal, Pegasus scandal. It needs much efforts that we could invite some victims in this week, but never we couldn't achieve that we go to Spain as a mission of the committee. Until now, we were in Poland, in Israel, in a lot of other countries, but not in Spain. It's unbelievable. And you see there are a lot of pressure by the conservatives and the socialists in this parliament also against this report, and it's a big fight. My most important point is what is the recommendation of you? You told a lot of them. We discussed what should we demand? Banning or a moratorium? Okay, your argument is nice, chemical weapons, but I think we should discuss in the next weeks again and again what are realistic and good demands for this report. This report is important, and we would like invite you to support us. You can find us on the website of the European Parliament, and also our group is very engaged. I think I can tell us, and I thank you, Matthias. He was very helpful and grateful. It was grateful to work together with you in the last months. And yeah, so I have no closing remarks. You can see it. I have a lot of questions, and I think we have a lot of work. And thank you for all your coming. Thank you, Saskia. I don't know, is she in the online? No. But it's nice to work together with colleagues from other groups. This is helpful, and we are stronger. Thank you.
Yeah, and also a big shout out to Canella Witt, who is supposed to land now after she had to delay her flight and she was not allowed boarding. And yeah, please fill in the participants list if you didn't do so. There must be 2 at the bar. And thank you very much for coming.
The recording has stopped.